In the 90s, there were two Dick Tracy games, and everybody played the bad one. In 1990, Dick Tracy was everywhere. The movie, the merchandise, the Happy Meal toy, and two different games. And like I talked about with my GoldenEye video, the reason there were two different games is because licensing gets complicated. See, back in 1989, Batman proved that a comic book movie could be a blockbuster. And Disney thought Dick Tracy was going to be their Batman. The marketing was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. McDonald's ran their biggest promotion up until that point. Over 100 companies made merchandise. Everybody wanted to get in on this. The movie had a huge opening, and then just as quickly it faded away. The movie didn't flop. It made $162 million, but Disney's expectations were so high, they still saw it as a disappointment. The window to cash in on this movie was closing fast, and Nintendo and Genesis were both making games, and now they had to get them out the door. The problem was, only Sega actually had rights to the movie. Bandai, who was working with Nintendo, they had the rights to the comic book. So they made a game that was based on cases from the comic book, but they dressed it up to look like it was connected to the movie using the likenesses of the characters from the movie, which was a setback. People who were expecting to play a game that was just like the movie weren't going to get it. And it also meant they couldn't use all the characters from the movie if they weren't in the comic book. More specifically, Madonna. Breathless Mahoney, Madonna's character from the movie, couldn't be in the Nintendo game, but Nintendo did have one major advantage over Sega. Their game got out first, 2 months after the release of the movie, while it was still at its peak. And they weren't just making some side-scroller, they wanted to make a game that really felt like you were a detective. The game was made up of 5 cases. You had to drive to different locations in an overworld map, collect clues, do interrogations, and make arrests. The game really tried to simulate being Detective Dick Tracy. The ambition was real, but the design choices really dragged this game down. First off, it's an NES game, so it's hard. But the problem isn't that it's hard in ways that feel unfair. Shoot someone who's unarmed, you lose life. Interrogate too many of the wrong people, game over. Arrest the wrong person, game over. And you only get 1 life with no continues. There are passwords that'll let you start over at the beginning of the case, but that's really frustrating if you're most of the way through a case when you screw up. Even just driving around can get you killed because there are snipers on the rooftops. You can shoot back, but the car can only shoot straight. So if you actually want to shoot at an angle to hit a sniper, you have to get out of the car and walk. And if you die, all the snipers come back anyway. The difficulty ramps up massively towards the end with levels filled with enemies with Tommy guns and other unarmed enemies that move in fast forward, and levels filled with rats that can also kill you. You have medkits that can heal you, but for some reason, instead of just pressing B to use an item like you use every other item, you have to press select NB to use the medkit, which is a really small thing, but it's just another really small thing that didn't have to work the way it does and makes things just a little more complicated. The devs had great ambition, it's just the execution that made this game go from difficult to just unfair. But Nintendo did get their game out first, so it sold well, and it's the one most people played and remember. And then Sega got their version out about 8 months later, after all the hype had died down and the movie had already been released on VHS. And they also made a completely different game. By February 1991, the hype was gone, and the game releasing into that dead silence was the first project for a brand new studio, Sega Technical Institute. STI was founded by Mark Kearney, the Atari guy who designed Marble Madness at like 18, with a very specific vision, an elite studio that combined Japanese and American talents, operating completely outside of Sega's corporate structure. There was no management interference, just hire the best people, give them money, and get out of the way so they can do their job. And his first major recruit was Yutaka Sugano, the creator of Shinobi. Then, after a compensation dispute after the first Sonic the Hedgehog, Kearney flew out to Japan and convinced Team Sonic to come back to America and join STI. The team that made Dick Tracy on the Genesis is the core of the team that would go on to make Sonic 2. Dick Tracy was just the project that kept the lights on while all the real work was being planned. And what they did was strip away all of that detective stuff. They made a side-scrolling shooter No detective work, no clues, no interrogations, just walk right and shoot everything in your way. And because Sega had the movie license, all of the enemies and the final fight were from the movie. And the signature mechanic was a two-plane system. You had a handgun for shooting enemies in the foreground and a Tommy gun for shooting enemies in the background. So at any moment, you're dealing with threats from the right, left, and behind you. It's one of those easy to learn, hard to master games, but it builds a rhythm across the 6 levels. There's no inventory, there are no items, there's no worrying about shooting unarmed people. Kill everyone, shoot up a storefront, fire bullets into that car, no one cares. The early stages are pretty easy, it gives you time to learn the system, but it escalates pretty fast into a twitchy arcade shooter. Pistol the guys up front, Tommy gun the guys in the back, and each boss has a gimmick, a pattern that you can learn. And there's a continue system, so if you die, you restart the level, you don't start all over. The game was tough, but it was fair. By almost every measure, it was a better game. So why does almost no one remember it? Timing. And a console war that Sega was already starting to lose. In 1990, Nintendo dominated the market. It was in more homes than Sega, and their version hit in 1990 when kids were still all hyped up about the movie and begging their parents to buy them the game. By the time Sega's version came out, the moment had passed. It got good reviews, but terrible sales. And in fact, it underperformed so badly that Sega actually made a new rule. If they were going to do any more movie tie-in projects, they had to get involved at least a year before the movie's release. Both games were just products of their constraints. Bandai tried to make something huge and ambitious with the comic book rights and Nintendo hardware. Sega built a stripped-down arcade shooter with the movie rights and a more powerful machine. The simpler game was the better one. And maybe that's something to think about. Ambition's not always an asset. Sometimes you have to look at your restrictions. One game tried to do everything, and it ended up doing nothing great. The other stripped it down and did one thing really well. And most people only remember the bad one. See you next time.